Thursday night planning.
Hang on.
Did you turn that on?
Hold on.
Oh,
yeah.
Excuse me. We'd like to begin our meeting
Pledge of Allegiance.
with
Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You're up.
you're good at being a loudmouth. Good evening, everyone. Stepping in for our chair, Mr. Ed Mullen. He is away this evening. I thank you all for coming. We're joined here this evening by the zoning board, senior housing folks and interested parties, and Judy Barrett from that has been working on this as part of the master plan. This is the only item on our agenda this evening. Judy has a presentation for us. There is going to be plenty of time for us to have a discussion and hear your thoughts. And she also has some questions in which she would like to have your feedback. So we'll keep this meeting running smoothly, and I apologize for the few-minute late start. We had some technical difficulties.
Which are now solved.
Perfect.
Okay, super.
We have to file out at 7:30, so I'm not sure if her presentation will be over. I request from us that you not schedule the meetings on the third Thursday of the month when we're supposed to meet, also so that we can attend, because as it is, we have to leave at 7:30 for our own meeting.
Okay, thank you. Nice to be back. I was asked to come back and work with the planning board and others in town to see where the town's thoughts are at this point on senior residential development, the bylaw that was taken to town meeting, and how that might be changed, if at all. This meeting also will look a little bit at a proposed or a suggested inclusionary zoning bylaw, which is zoning for affordable housing, regardless of whether it's senior housing. And then there's a third piece to this, which really we're just going to touch on tonight, that actually is not so much the planning board's purview, but really up to the Board of Selectmen, and it's part of this discussion because the town administrator and others had asked to include it, and that is whether the town should establish what's called a municipal affordable housing trust. That is not a zoning change, it's a general bylaw that involves adopting a statute. So I just want to kind of go over what this package is, because I think it might be helpful to people to just at least know there was actually some thought as to how all these different pieces came together. And just to also be clear, all of these in kind of one way or another really get back to the fact that a couple of years ago your town completed a affordable housing plan with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. That just kind of barely preceded our work on the master plan. So when we were asked to come and help the planning board with senior housing, we were actually helping the planning board look at ways to implement that housing plan. So that's just sort of a little bit of a backdrop. But why don't we go forward? You're going to run that, right? Yep. So here's what we're going to do tonight. As I said, we're going to look at the zoning for senior housing and talk a little bit about what you folks would like to consider going forward. And then the inclusionary zoning, which the planning board really hasn't had a chance to discuss yet. And then the proposed affordable housing trust. Okay. So what was taken to town meeting, as I think you all know, but I'm just going to regroup because I don't know who's here and who was at town meeting and who wasn't, was a proposed amendment to your existing senior housing bylaw. And the current bylaw essentially requires a special permit for over 55 housing, and it has to include affordable units. There's a minimum acreage size for an eligible tract of 5 acres, up to 3 units per acre with 25% lower moderate income affordable units. And at least at the time that we started working with the planning board, there had really only been a couple of projects, I think, that actually triggered that or sought interest in it, Reed Lane and Jeanette Way. So part of the question we were asked was, how could the town make the senior residential development bylaw more effective? How could we create more senior housing and perhaps address needs that this bylaw does not currently address? So the proposed single residential development bylaw, which I'll refer to as SRD from this point on, pardon the acronyms. I want to just talk a little bit about why that bylaw was written the way it was, so that at least if you want to make changes to it, you'll know that there was actually a rationale. Why it provides for age quote, targeted or age designed instead of age restricted housing, because I know that was a question at town meeting. Kind of a little bit of a look at what's best practices out there with senior housing development today. The relationship of any senior housing bylaw, and this one in particular, to Chapter 40B, which I think probably all of you are familiar with, but that's the state's affordable housing law. And then some trade-offs if you want to make changes to this, kind of what the implications of those changes might be. So, senior residential development. The bylaw elements, go ahead even to the next slide. Call for a special permit, which means that it's discretionary on the part of the planning board. The planning board can approve it or deny it based on a set of criteria in the bylaw. It calls for a variety or allows for a variety of different housing types, recognizing that as people age, their needs change. And so this was an attempt to say, when you're 55, when you're 65, your needs are not the same perhaps as they are when you're 85. So how do we provide sort of a continuum? We wanted to provide for something that's suitable for very small scale development as well as larger scale. It was intended to support aging in community. Now, many of you may be familiar with some of this terminology. There's this concept called aging in place, and there's a concept called aging in community, and they're not the same. And aging in community is, do our communities provide for a variety of housing so people don't have to leave the town even if they are no longer able to live in the house they've lived in for 40 years, which happens to be my case. It also provides enough density to attract high-quality senior housing developers. And we spent a lot of time before we wrote this bylaw just talking to developers who are doing senior housing in the eastern Massachusetts market to try to find out what works and what doesn't work and why they're making some of the choices that they are. Because if you want a bylaw that works, you kind of have to know what the industry is looking for. And so with that the conversation, we were suggesting enough density, meaning enough units per acre, to provide for amenities, because you need amenities to get the developers to come here, and also to encourage the production of senior rental housing, which right now your bylaw does not do. It just does not provide for the type of structure, and it doesn't provide for enough density. And then we suggested that the town consider what we call age-targeted design, which is not the same as a legal deed restriction limiting the age of the occupants. So that's what was proposed at town meeting. There are different kinds of senior housing models. I don't know why that is coming out the way it is. It looks so pretty on my computer, but it doesn't up there. So I'll just briefly tell you, this bylaw recognizes that there are different housing types, from sort of an active adult type housing, which is really what your bylaw provides for today. There's senior apartments, there's assisted living, there's memory care, there's skilled nursing, there's continuing care retirement. There's a lot of different types of housing that this industry looks to build. And of course, there's always an assessment of what is not in the market in a given area, because the developers don't want to build something for which there's no demand. We can go on to the next slide, Mara. Why do we recommend age targeted? I know there's a lot of questions about this, and this is sort of an example of something we're going to talk about trade-offs in a minute. It was to, first of all, encourage development of housing that's designed for older citizens, and we tried to encourage that by providing not only a statement that units should be appropriate for older people, but also what that means in terms of a design of a unit and a design of a site. To reduce the developer's risk, because if you've read the papers, you may know that some senior housing developments in eastern Massachusetts have actually had trouble finding buyers. There are lots of reasons for that, but if someone needs to come back to a board and say, this just isn't working, if you don't provide for some flexibility, it becomes very difficult for the town to work with the developer. So that was kind of the logic in it. And then to recognize that there are long-term demographic trends that argue for a multiplicity of housing types, as I said earlier. So that was the rationale for age-targeted. Best industry practices right now in this field, first of all, look for design, really high-quality design. Unit sizes and configurations vary. The public senior housing we built 30 years ago is not necessarily what the market of seniors looking to downsize today need or want or can even manage. We had that conversation with the accessory apartment bylaw. How big do you make these units? Certainly designing for what we call visitability. Not only is this unit okay for me, but can someone come and see me? Can my relatives come? Can my friends come? Can they get in and out? Can I get in and out? So visitability is this concept of access, and specifically access designed for older people. Memory care is a big deal in this business now. Almost everywhere you look, where there's any kind of senior housing being built, there's a memory care component. The people who were 65 20 years ago, for whom active adult housing was originally designed, are now 85. And the typical resident of an assisted living development is an 85-year-old woman. That is just a national trend. It's true in Massachusetts. And as people age, they start to have memory issues. How well I know. Intergenerational development, it's true. Intergenerational development is another kind of trend in the field. Not all assisted living or all elderly housing is built for intergenerational design, but many of them are. There's a particularly successful one in Dedham. So developers are looking for, how do you make a product that's flexible? How do you make something that can kind of move with the market as people age, so you don't lose your tenants or lose your occupants? And then amenities determine the market, and I can't underscore this enough. Developers need to compete for this market. There are people who are older, like me, have options, and so they're looking for the best deal they can get. And when you have a development that doesn't provide any kind of amenities for people who live there, they're apt to choose something else. Well, the only way you can afford to accommodate those amenities in a project is to provide for the density that then brings the income, so the developer actually can make some money and get a bank loan. So those are kind of industry trends that are going on in this field.
Could you give us a couple of examples of amenities?
Yeah, on-site services, on-site services. Nobody's building golf courses anymore with assisted living or elderly housing development or senior housing, but recreational amenities that are appropriate for older people. There's just a cost to all of this. A development that has both full kitchens in the units, but also shared cooking facilities, shared living room, shared space, common space. When you start packing common space into a development, you're packing cost, because there isn't a direct revenue dollar coming out of that common space. So the more you're trying to create an environment for people to feel like they're in a community, there's a cost to that gets shared by all those units. And if you don't have enough units, you don't get the amenities. So,
and are service amenities also something that people are looking for?
Well, it's very interesting you should ask this, because 15 years ago when we had these conversations, services were associated with assisted living. Now what we're seeing is that developments that were built as, quote, independent living projects, where there's shared facilities but semi-private rooms, semi-private apartments really, in order to not lose those tenants or occupants to assisted living, independent living developments are now trying to bring services in so that they are effectively operating as assisted living. And that's raising a lot of issues in the field around at what point does something trigger certification by the state, because assisted living developments require certification, independent living does not. So there's a lot of conversation going on in this field about how do you build a product that's appropriate for people as they age. And it's not just fixed at a point in time when they're 55 or 65. It's how do you allow it to flow? Otherwise, you really don't have a way for people to age in any place. So anyway, those are kind of what's going on in the industry. And then the other thing I was asked about was, well, how do we deal with affordability? Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. What is the relationship between senior housing and Chapter 40B? And this is one of the most difficult conversations to have in this business, because in many cases, the senior housing developments that have had problems have had difficulty selling the affordable units for seniors. And there are a lot of reasons for that, and it's not because people don't need housing. It's because they can't meet the asset limit or the income limit to qualify for an affordable unit under Chapter 40B as it's designed. So you can require affordability, but you probably want to be careful about whether those units have to count on the subsidized housing inventory, because chances are you're going to have a developer coming back and saying, I can't sell these units, or I'm having a lot of trouble selling them. Or an owner who bought at one point in time when there was a market to buy those units, but now 15 years later, that demographic is dying. And that is the longer term, I think, real concern in this business is we're trying to build housing right now for a bubble. But we're all going to die. I don't know about you guys, but we're all gonna die someday, and the demographic behind us isn't as big. So for a developer, for a lender, for a bank, there's big questions here about how do you design a development that's got durability? It's a big issue. So the affordability factor, when you pack that on to other issues that already make it kind of difficult to develop this housing, it just becomes kind of another barrier for the developer. So I wouldn't say don't require affordability, but you might want to think about how you define that, and do those units have to count? Did you want to ask a question?
Yes, have you researched affordable units in this particular area?
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm having a lot of trouble finding them. Well, the few that are out there tend to stay on the market a day or two.
Yep. It
They
depends,
are-
it depends on the development.
I'm talking in this the areas, the town, Stowe, Acton, Littleton, Groton,
Yep.
any of the senior citizen housings that have any affordable units, they are off the market within 24, 48 hours.
Okay. I have worked in several towns out here. My experience is that the rental developments tend to go like that. The homeowner units, it's more of a mixed bag. That's my experience, so. But the rental units, it's true, and this gets to the next issue. You want to go on? The next issue is how do you get rental units? For many people who are, quote, seeking to downsize, they're not necessarily interested in buying a place to live. Many people are looking for rental options. You can't build rental housing at 3 units an acre. You just can't do it. So you've got to, if you want to provide for a choice that allows seniors living in Littleton today to stay, or people who have older parents who want to bring them here, you got to think about what is it that people are actually looking for, and perhaps step back a little bit about your own assumptions as middle-aged people, like, what do you want to live in? You got to think about what people are looking for when they're considerably older. And in order to get that product, there's this trade-off, and that trade-off is density. So I completely agree on the rental developments, the units just go. You know what that's-
I'm not looking at rental developments at all. I'm only looking at for sale developments. And I've had a couple clients that I've been looking for 2 years for affordable
Yep.
and not been able to find them in the area, or they compete, and I've done things like had to drive down paperwork to the, immediately that day in order to get a client a property like that. So I'm wondering if the trend has perhaps changed in this particular area, or perhaps this particular area is just a little different, or something. I'm wondering why I'm having trouble finding these affordable units if they're out there not being sold.
I can't speak to a specific development. I don't know what the circumstances are.
I'm talking about this group of
No,
towns.
I know. I'm saying I don't know why you're having trouble. I can only tell you, because I've worked in several towns out here, that selling senior units can be a real challenge for the developer. Or the resale unit. The resale unit is sometimes even more challenging. I bought in a development that was built 10 years ago.
Sure,
I'm
we
now trying to
we had
sell.
trouble up on Harvard Road with John Barbadero, trying to sell the affordable units he had there. He couldn't get qualified clients for that one.
They sold very quickly.
No, they
I had-
didn't.
I-
He
yeah.
had trouble. We had to make the last couple of ones affordable, and then because there was no affordable with that, we had to build the ones out front,
Right.
have them build the ones out front in order to get some sort of affordable out of there. Most of them were market rates out there because they couldn't qualify.
But the affordable ones, I mean, I sold one of the affordable ones.
Ones in the
It was-
fronts, the
Yes,
duplexes,
yes.
finally, because we got rid of the affordability of it, because he was tied to, I think it was the state, wasn't it? He was tied to the state guidelines when he was doing it.
Well, that's because
We
of how you
have
define
highlights
affordable housing.
that we don't have the inventory that people are looking for.
Right.
We don't have the right types of units.
That's part of the issue. So, really I'm looking for some guidance from the town, because there's a lot of issues here, and I'm willing to try to work with your community on how to make this a better bylaw. That's my job. But I have questions for you, and we're not going to resolve them all tonight, but perhaps we'll at least get some discussion going. So these are some sort of trade-offs, some of the trade-offs I think the town needs to consider, and one is, how do people feel about this concept of age-targeted versus age-restricted? Do you want to require an age restriction or not? Do you want to require it and give the planning board the flexibility to waive it if necessary? There's different ways to think about this, and for any of these, there's this sort of potential consequence. And if you stay with age-targeted, you're probably more likely to get development. Some units may not sell to seniors, and I'm going to be really honest about this, because when you design it, housing is a product that's designed for certain types of households. And so when you design a product for a buyer or a renter, you're designing it with that market in mind. And I can just tell you that in developments that have been built around Massachusetts that are not necessarily age restricted, but rather were built under bylaws like a planned development bylaw or something, you really don't find many children if they're in a town where the predominant housing stock is single-family homes. And that's because people with kids have choices in the market. So they don't really buy in these developments. I don't know about the rest of you, but when my kids were little, I would not have wanted to live in a development where all of my neighbors were 70 years old. Now, you might want to do that, but that was not going to be my choice. And I think it isn't for a lot of families. So, but I don't want to lie to you and say it's all going to be seniors, because that certainly potential exists. That you will have an occasional family. You may have divorced, non-custodial parents. We find this very often now in condominium, townhouse developments, anything where people can kind of have a choice to be in the community with their kids who aren't living with them, but to be able to be close by. So that's another whole market out there that nobody really talks about very much. So, you know, you might get development. You probably will get development. You might get some units that don't necessarily sell to older people. If you require the age restriction, you're probably less likely to get development that actually works, but it guarantees senior occupancy. So, I mean, those are the trade-offs I'm talking about. You know, requiring the age restriction, but giving the planning board the flexibility to waive it under some pretty strict guidelines might be the best of both worlds. But I'm looking for some thoughts on this. You run the meeting, I'm just throwing out
I
stuff.
think I have a question maybe more for Pamela. Do we understand what our needs in the town are? Like, are we needing do we need rentals? Like, what is it that our town actually needs for our seniors?
So that addressed me.
Yeah,
Have you read the housing production plan?
probably not.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of information that went into putting that together.
Okay.
Looking specifically at the town of Littleton.
Because that would make sense that we would take that information, if it's asking for more rentals, if it's asking more, because just putting in, 55 plus, or just putting in, that will only address maybe one issue, but what are our larger issues for actually the people within our town and our surrounding communities? And then matching what those needs are up to maybe what we're proposing here.
I think this proposal does address the needs that are outlined in that plan.
Okay.
That's all I can say. The plan doesn't identify one need, because there
Okay.
isn't one market of senior households.
Chair? There are about, you just showed 10,000 people in town now, is that right? What is the percentage of people over 70 in Littleton?
We have the percentage over 65 was 15%.
Yeah, and climbing,
Yeah.
about 1,800 people.
Okay. Out of those,
Yeah.
what, do you want to do the math too?
Oh, I said I would. Just got
Over what, 65? Never admit.
Well, but I asked for that number twice this year. In January, it's 14%, and when you move that up to June, it's 15%. So that's how
Yeah.
fast we're
It
aging.
is really climbing.
That's because September, October are busy months. Do the math. So, what are we projecting as far as from 45 to 50 to 65? What, do we know what that is?
It's in NAPC's demographics, off the top of my head, I do not remember.
All right, now.
If I'd known you were going to quiz me on demographics, I would have brought my statistics.
I know.
But the graphs that I've seen do show that there is this drop-off. To 2030, the older population grows and grows and grows and grows, and then we die and die and die,
That's right.
and the next population does not have that kind of a growth curve.
Yeah, it's a smaller cohort.
Yeah.
That's part of the market, the long-range market concern for this housing
So,
product.
for our bylaw, as you said earlier, to tie it into 55 and older or something like this, it's not advantageous to a builder to come in and build something that he's restricted on what he can or can't do with it over a
It's
period
less
of time.
advantageous.
Did I
You're always
say-
doing a market study.
Well, I said it's not advantageous. Is less advantageous the better thing to say?
I think so, because
Okay, I'll
some
go with
people,
that. Well, if that be the case, then to restrict it, what we brought before the town meeting last in what, April?
May.
May, it was May 1st.
It addressed many of these issues, but truthfully, I think we didn't present it to you well enough. or somebody, we didn't have enough meetings leading up to it for you to understand, for all of us to understand exactly what we're getting out of it. So what Judy's now, professed to us is that if we watch our P's and Q's and we get people in here and they're interested in building something and we don't tie their hands, then we're gonna be able to meet the needs of our aging group right now. And when, as you say, they start turning over, we'll have a younger crowd ready to take over.
You mean dying off?
Yeah, so be it. I think you're right, nobody gets out alive.
You jump in and out of this bylaw with the word developer. There really are two kinds of entities that are in and out of this. One is a developer and one is a corporation. Developers are the ones that are gonna come in and build the housing to sell to the people that are selling their big house and wanna downsize and stay in a house that they own, that they live in Littleton. They just don't want the big house. They want a condo or they want.
That's one set, that's
Right.
one group.
But the developer is that group. The corporation that comes in, like Deaconess and things like that, are gonna
It's a
offer.
different market, different product.
But that's the market that you're also talking about here. That's where the confusion came in.
They're developers.
Well, sure, of course they're developers, but they keep it. They're keeping it to offer all the amenities, to give you a place where you go in and you probably don't own it, or you might lease it until you turn over, and things like that, and offer all the different amenities that go with it, but it's assisted living that you work your way through. That's a big complex. That's what was scary to everybody when they saw the picture up there of the big apartment complex with all those things.
Yep.
They got confused that a developer's gonna come in and gonna put 200 apartments up there. That's, I think, where I fell down, because I didn't distinguish between the fact that we're looking at people who wanna stay in Littleton and keep their house and keep their money that they made on the capital gains on it and still be able to have something smaller, okay? That way they don't have to live with the 40B restrictions of having to afford it and not having to afford it. That's one thing. And then you have the developer who wants to come, I did the same thing, the corporation that want to come in and build a complex on 50 acres or 30 acres, like we have up on Foster Street, that can be assisted living, affordable, semi-assisted, the whole thing. They own it, and you pay them, and you live through it for 30 years or however long. That never gets sold. You go in, you buy into it, or however the ownership is involved in. But that's a different entity than the people that come in that we're targeting to build single-family housing in here.
Well, I think, again, because I was asked to try to help make a bylaw that would be more effective, and I was asked to respond to your housing
Right.
needs plan. Your needs are more than a small, single-family home. You have other needs here. You have seniors who are not 65 looking to downsize. You have much older people in this
No, I agree,
community.
and I think
So
that-
I think there is this need for a continuum, and that's what I was trying to stress. Now, it's up to you guys, it's your town, but if you're really trying to meet a whole bunch of needs and not just the snapshot you have of the senior who's an empty nester who's recently retired, you've got seniors here who don't fit in that mold. You must see them. And that's a different housing product, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
But that's the boogeyman that everyone was afraid of. So that's why we have to isolate that A is a special permit. Maybe we do it as a major industrial, commercial component of this or something, so that people understand that it's not just gonna be by right, all of a sudden, there's gonna be apartment complexes all
It's
over.
a special permit.
I know, but they don't understand. The
Okay, but
regular
they need to-
person,
they need to be
the
told
regular,
that.
well, the regular person going to a town meeting doesn't want to be protected by quote-unquote a special permit, because what happens if you do it to one, you have to kind of give it to everybody else. There has to be a compelling reason why to turn it down, not because we already have one and we don't want another one. There has to be a reason. It's gonna have to be the site doesn't work, the traffic, things like that. So it can't be a buy right. Anybody who wants to come in and buy 30 acres of land in Littleton can all of a sudden put up a senior living complex that's basically an elderly apartment complex.
But that's not what this is, Mark. This is all special permit.
I
Everything
know,
we're
but
talking
everybody
here is special
understands that that's not just the only
Okay,
safety.
but then they
net.
need that explanation from the
permit.
board.
Yeah, all right, so we're.
But what I'm saying is there's two different entities. There's the entity of affordable housing for single-family ownership, and then there's the corporate thing where whoever's building that is gonna own it and rent it to you, and it's more of an apartment kind of complex deal than just single-family
So
ownership.
you want to be sure that whatever we develop here has the ability to build single-family houses.
I wanna make,
Small-
yeah, I think that's.
Small, single-family
I
houses.
think most of the people that are here, we should probably ask them, if they had a choice, would rather go from their big four-bedroom house that they raise their kids in, that they're paying $10 or $12 or $13,000 in taxes to a small little two-bedroom house that's easier to take care of, maybe even a condo. Where they could come and go, and they can go to Florida in the winter, or they could do whatever they want, and they're not worried about the state saying, oh, you can't live there because you make too much money, that kind of stuff. They still want single-family ownership, because Littleton is still a single-family ownership town.
They have a garage and the next door neighbor is 20 feet away.
Well, that's fine, that's
Yeah.
still fine, but that's,
No, that's a good concept.
That's
I
the-
agree that we need that kind of
downside.
concept here.
I'm the last
But-
person to talk about downsizing,
But
but that's,
we also
when
need.
people are looking for
We also need
downsizing.
other options.
Well,
I
this is
do-
the problem
we
is,
do.
you can ask people who are in this room tonight what they need,
Yep.
but how do you ask the people who can't get to a meeting like this because they're too old to drive at night?
Why don't
I
we
mean,
ask them
that's-
what they want?
Well, I think you have, that's what your housing plan does,
Well-
that's what you have.
So what I think Judy has done here, she's developed something that'll be able to meet all of these different needs.
I agree, but I think the issue is that when we go to town meeting, people they see that big apartment complex up there and are afraid that this is just.
We didn't do a good job
Yeah.
giving all of that
We did a good
information.
job, we did not, you're correct. We should have had more meetings, we should have brought people in.
Yeah, the current standard is to do a LCTV program, explaining the bylaw and, answering questions,
All folks heard was apartments. They
Right.
didn't see all of the underlying
Right.
detail
Yeah.
and what our focus was.
So, and I think we're lucky to have Judy to help walk us through that process this time
So,
for the fall town meeting.
Judy, what are the types of housing that this could construct?
Well, it could be single-family detached, single-family attached.
That's right.
It could be townhouse condominiums, it could be multifamily condominiums, it could be assisted living, it could be independent living. That's all defined in the bylaw. And it's certainly true that when you get into the smaller the unit, the greater the need for the density, and that's where you start
Yeah.
to see the larger building. And some of that is because if you're going to have a building in which people are getting services, you have to be able, as an organization running a facility like that, to deliver those services efficiently. So you can't do that when everybody's in a detached, single-family home that's scattered around a site at 3 units an acre. It just doesn't work. That type of housing meets a certain need, but it doesn't meet all the needs. So when you asked, how do we get something that's more effective, that's why you've got this range. It's a menu, is what it is. This bylaw is about a menu. Now, you may not want a menu, but I then am not sure where you go.
Well, you don't always want to eat fish.
But see, then again, you bring up the other point. If you make it so that you can you take smaller lots and put higher density and you spread them all over town, then you run the problem of, a lot of this is gonna be single family, a lot of it, you're gonna have social services, people wanting to get the social services, to get to the common and things like that. And if you spread it all over the place, you're gonna have problems, just like we have right now with the affordable housing we have in Littleton. There's no transit system, so to speak, and you see people walking or riding bikes or whatever, trying to get up to the amenities that they need. That's why maybe
Trying to stay in shape so they don't go into that hole.
maybe you restrict it to larger parcels either, so that you can have amenities that go with the
Yeah,
single-family house.
But people need different things. I think if they need an amenities package, then you're probably going to be looking at a larger development.
Right.
If what you need is small downsizing, you can do that on a very small parcel. So, you know,
But it's supply and demand.
We have
Right.
some questions.
Sure, sure.
This one over here was, this gentleman had seen up earlier, and then she's next.
All right, we'll go over here.
I'm sorry.
The sense that Gary O'Curry, Jane Mill Road, Littleton, the sense that I got from the town meeting last spring was concerned with the restricted, the not have, with the targeted versus the restricted.
yeah.
That we could have a high-density development, and if it was for elderly, great. But if it was only restricted, if it was only targeted, then we could have families of 4 who are gonna flood the school system, living in these apartments, because they're gonna be more affordable and just not get the audience that you intended. Now, I understand, Judy, what you're saying about flexibility in the market, and I think what I heard at the presentation was it also bypasses some state regulations or some restrictions.
No,
No, that was mentioned at the town meeting last spring.
No, there's no state issue
There's
involved in
some
this.
state issues with it as well,
Only
but
with regard to the definition of affordability.
maybe with regards to affordability, okay. But
But you have that problem now. I mean, that's in your bylaw now. We didn't create that.
Well, I think you have to address that concern.
Mhm.
Whatever you do, I
Yep.
think you have to address the concern of people that would have, that this could be an in for people into the town, who want to come into the town, and we'll deal with living around people who are 40 years older than them, just so they can get their foot in the door, go to the school systems, and then the unintended consequences that, of putting something in place that doesn't, that gets people in here that isn't the target people you want to have in here.
And I hear that, and that's why I'm saying, it's a decision the town has to make. You need to tell me what you want. We're not gonna try to make that decision tonight, but I need to know, because your options are leave it age targeted or age targeted by design, require an age restriction across the board, or require an age restriction across the board, but give the planning board the flexibility to grant a waiver.
But you see, Judy, if we're talking about an option for seniors, and, seniors being anybody over 45, to move
55.
into,
55.
50, or even younger.
Well, but the definition of over 55 housing is 55.
Well,
That's the federal
yeah,
fair housing
but if
definition.
we're just talking about targeted, then you could get somebody under 55.
Oh, sure, you could.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen, but I mean, you could, sure.
But we're talking about one-bedroom units, maybe two-bedroom units.
Probably two.
That's gonna preclude.
Probably
any families
two-bedroom.
moving in.
I mean, I gotta be honest with you, I mean, this has been the whole issue with this public housing industry, is that years ago, public housing was built for one-bedroom units, and that was probably okay at some point, but now, people who are downsizing, they're not moving into one, they need more space, so I'm not gonna lie to anybody here, I think a one-bedroom unit is probably, until you get into the assisted living, independent living model, where you're dealing with a lot of older single women, because their husbands are dead, there's, the younger market is gonna be two-bedroom units.
Even so, two-bedroom still precludes families.
Well, it discourages them, it doesn't
Yeah.
preclude them.
But
I grew up with 8 kids, how many of us are in one bedroom?
Yeah.
Nancy Levine, Gristmill Road.
Yep.
I'd like to use 15 Great Road as an example. It had apartments, low income. It had condos. It had some little houses, low income. I know several Littleton seniors over 65 and over 85 who could not afford to move there.
Yeah, it's
Because they were too expensive?
Too expensive. Low income,
Yeah.
low income.
Right.
Yeah, that's the problem
It's a
with
huge
not
issue.
building enough density. If
No, that was
if
the
you-
fault of
Bristol's got plenty of density.
No, if you build more if they had more of those single-family houses in one lot, that's, I think, what Judy's driving at.
Well, I have to support what she's saying. This is a huge issue in the Boston metro area, because your income limits for affordable units are based on a regional household median that includes Boston, Cambridge, Lexington, the west suburbs, and so the income limits tend to be high. And the developers build and sell or rent to that highest level, and they only bring it down when they can't fill the units. So you're not the only one who has made that comment. I've heard this a lot.
About that, isn't it mainly the asset limits that cause?
For
us the
seniors,
trouble?
it's mostly the asset limits, but when you have seniors who've never owned a home, it's an issue with rental.
Well, I'm
It's
glad you
just
brought
an issue with
15
income.
Great Road, because that is the garden-style apartments
Yep.
had elevators. One of them has structured parking.
Yep.
I mean, that's
You
what
pay for that.
that's what elderly people need. I mean, they're not glamorous, but they're 1, 2, and 3 bedroom. And so then it comes down to, there are some seniors who have the money to move into a smaller home and keep it.
Yep.
But for the seniors who can't even afford one of these garden-style apartments.
They're expensive.
You have to put
I know,
some.
but
Rent
that's
is
new
in there?
construction, that's just the
No,
way it's.
and that's why the housing trust is the third piece of this.
Okay,
package.
well, that's maybe what, for the group that can't afford that, what.
You have
what
to have
can do?
subsidy. I mean,
Yeah.
this is why the affordable housing situation in Massachusetts and really all over the country is in such a crisis, is that we're building developments that assume the subsidy for the affordable units is coming from inside the development through the sale or rental of market rate housing. You can't get deeply subsidized units in that model. It's just not possible to do. You have to have a financial subsidy to the development. Well, the federal government, you know, I won't make a political statement here, but the federal government has not been subsidizing affordable housing for a long time. So, you know, we have a situation now where the affordable units just aren't really affordable to many people who need them. And then, when you have a problem selling units or getting enough people to rent, people say, well, I guess there must not be a need for affordable housing, when the reality is the pricing is off. So in order to actually get at this problem, you need a way to provide a subsidy, and that's what the housing trust piece of this package is all about. So I don't disagree with you at all. I've heard this story over and over again.
Sherry, did you?
I just wanted to comment that the feedback I get, and that's a lot of traffic into the office in some elders and town meeting, was they did not like the targeted. They wanted age restricted.
Yep.
They did not like the density being anywhere in town, and they were all worried that you could have had a 4-acre parcel behind my house on Tehadawon and put up an independent living situation right there in a very residential area. And they didn't like the dollars. And the dollars are a real problem, because even under the state's affordability bylaws, seniors can't afford to be in
That's
those
what we're
apartments,
talking
as you
about.
all just said.
Yeah.
But you also, as Mark said, can't build new construction for much less than that. But I don't think your bylaw is encouraging reduced prices by more density. I think what happens everywhere is that more density means the developer makes more money. He doesn't reduce the price because he got extra density.
I agree. That's why the housing trust is a piece of this package.
Yeah, but you're still giving the developers this huge windfall. I mean, look at 15 Great Road. We expected those units, the market units, to go at 350. They're almost 600,000 a unit. And
Stories everywhere.
that's preposterous. We approved it
Yeah.
thinking that we would get $350,000 units in there,
Nope.
that a homeowner could downsize
Yep.
and an elder could go in at 167 in the affordables. That's not what's happening.
I know. I know.
Well, how can we make it happen?
You need cash subsidy.
No, we need developers to stop being pigs.
Well, I think it's a more complicated picture than that. It's also the landowner involved, so let's just be careful. I mean, everybody's got a role in this,
Yeah, the landowner.
and I don't want to start pointing fingers, but I just would say, my experience in 30 years in this field is that when you need very low-cost units, you need a cash subsidy. You need it, because otherwise the units won't get built. We can sit here and say till the cows come home, well, the developer should do this, the landowner should do that, but it's a free market, that's the country we've got. And as long as that is the rules, as long as the rules of the game are that sort of laissez-faire system, then you've got to accept that the pricing will always err to the highest point in the market that one can get. Therefore, to get something that's deeply affordable, you need a subsidy. And that's, I think, where the housing trust piece comes in, that's so important in here. And also the inclusionary bylaw, which provides for fees in lieu, which we'll get to when we get to that.
See, I don't 100% agree with you.
That's okay.
When we did, and I'm gonna use for an example, Delaney Drive.
Yep.
There was an open space, it was smaller units.
Yep.
We didn't set the price, but we were told what the price was gonna be when we approved it. This is going back 15 years now.
Yep.
What the prices were gonna be. They were all very much affordable. Everybody who had a shot to buy them, they were buying them because they were empty nesters going in. Just 2 bedrooms, they were restricted by size. They were never restricted by age, so anyone, you could get a first-time home buyer.
When was that
and
project done?
It was 15 years ago.
That's a very different time.
But the point is, you can, if you want to do it, you can restrict the cost of it. You can tell them, we're gonna give you density, and this is what we want the units to cost.
I would never want to try to litigate that permit.
Well, but that's the special permit process.
Well, but you can't just use a special permit to sort of impose whatever
No, but
conditions
if you
want.
tell them you want affordable, you have to spell out what affordable is. What percentage of the market rate is going to be an affordable
But I think that's her point,
density.
is that now you're getting affordable units in this market that aren't really affordable.
No, I think you have to. So if you want the bonus density, if you want to go from one house on 1 acre and you want to go to one house on 4 acres, 4 houses on 1 acre, you say, okay, you have to have that house at 50% of what the market rate is. That's what we're doing with if we do the inclusionary zoning, we're gonna ask for X amount at market rate and X amount at below market rate. If we do that from the get-go and tell them, okay, you want the density, this is what it's gonna cost.
But that's the position the Board of Appeals is in every time they get a comprehensive permit, is that,
Yeah, but we don't want comprehensive permits.
Mark, I understand that, I'm just saying that that those are price-regulated developments. And because the market has shifted so much and the cost of housing has accelerated beyond income growth, what may have worked 15 years ago doesn't necessarily work in this market today. That's why we're seeing 40B developments, which are based on a model of one affordable for 3 market rates. That's why we're seeing so much difficulty filling units in these developments, is because the pricing doesn't work for the people who actually need them. The market has changed.
Well, you have to figure a way to make sure that if you're gonna build an affordable unit, what is affordable in Littleton?
Yeah,
It can't be 650,000.
Mark, what
That's
you're-
the market
what
rate
you're-
housing.
What you're trying to say, describe is price fixing.
No, I'm trying to say, if you want a
Yeah,
higher
you're
density,
trying to
you
say
have to
that's
build
price.
X amount of units at an affordable price.
That's price fixing.
No, it's not. You're getting,
Someone's determined what affordable is.
Right.
That's a price fix in itself.
That's right.
True or false?
well, that's what the state's trying to make us do now. They have
Well, we
affordable guidelines.
Judy,
Your inclusionary, your senior housing bylaw does that now. It's the same standards the state uses. There's no difference. You already have it. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
surprised to hear this conversation, because you've already been requiring that here the whole time you've had this bylaw.
But we're going to more increase density. We're trying to keep the state out of it, is what we're trying to do.
Mark wants to, if I understand this right, create our own affordable number.
Yeah, exactly. What's affordable for the town of Littleton, not have the state tell us that it's 650 is affordable,
But
because
that's
it
a
doesn't
market rate
work.
unit, that's not an affordable unit.
Well, what happened to the affordables? How come none of the people that could buy affordables were able to
Because
get an
the people who
affordable?
need affordable housing don't have the incomes to pay for units that are priced at 80% of median. This is the problem.
That's what I'm saying, so 80% of median is too high. That's what I'm trying to say.
I hear you.
Okay.
Well, the developers have a choice of doing moderate or low, but
Right.
no developer does low as far as I'm.
Unless they do a lesser percentage of affordable units.
Okay.
And actually, in the rentals situation right now, in other communities in the Boston area, they're going for the 20% affordable
Okay,
at 50% of median, because they have less trouble renting them.
okay.
Because there are more people in need in that income tier than the 80%. So certainly, you can require a lower price, but then you're gonna be, the trade-off is giving up the percentage of affordable units. Something has to give. That's, I think, my message for you, and that's why I'm saying there are trade-offs here, and you guys have to give us direction about what you want. I'm just trying to tell you what the rationale was. Now you gotta give us direction, and that's why we're here.
No,
So-
you're doing a great job.
All right, so I get confused. I do black and white and pros and cons. What do I get if I do this? What do I pay if I want that? And what do I get over here?
Okay.
As far as fixing the price of a product, as far as a developer coming in and building something. Everybody, it's human nature. You want to make as much money as you possibly can. If you come in up front and you say, I'm going to build 10 units, I want $100,000 a unit, that's what I want to make across the board. Allow me to sell 4 of them at $50,000 each, and these other ones allow me to make $150,000 off of those. So is it affordable? Is it a number that we put into it? Yes. Is it a number that the contractor can live with? He's got to shag down somebody that's going to pay $150,000 over the $100,000. Now, again, you've limited the amount of money that a contractor can come in and make. That's if we're building small houses, small units, 4 to an acre, that idea. What I think is the smartest thing for us to do is to build a larger project and make the first people to get a shot at it, the people who live in Littleton. We assimilate what is exactly our low income in town. And we really gotta ask the elderly, and I'm not far away, ladies and gentlemen, what exactly do you need? Again, everybody who's here has got up and drove themselves more than likely, or got a ride. He said people riding bikes.
Well, what do you
If we
need
could-
now, and what do you think you're gonna need in 10 years?
Right, and so in 10 and 15 years, when we start rolling over, those units have got to be filled with somebody. So if we tie our hands with 55 and older, then someone's not going to want to come in. We're going to want to be able to we're going to want to have the opportunity to not restrict the age to only this. So when the woman that's 85 might get replaced by a guy that's 55, you can't hold their hands, you can't tie them up. It'll be a long-term reward for the person who comes in and build. So it might end up being a corporation that can ride out the storm. Maybe they might not make $1 million the first year, but they'll make $750 and $650 and $850 and $750 and, you know, that type of idea. We have to entice somebody to come in here, or the last part is we build our own.
That's the other option. I agree with Peter on two things.
Only one?
Two things.
How many things did I
Building
say?
Building our own is something we should be talking about as a town. We built a fire station, we built police station, we're building, you know, we're doing all this. It's the time we start thinking about the town
It's
sponsoring
one thing to do
something.
brick and mortar, it's another thing to fill it with cooks and cleaners and
Oh,
medical
yeah,
staffs
it's
and
a
all that.
different
It's
game.
You know,
Am I crazy, or is you
We got-
guys having fun with me?
we have a new ball field. We need something. That, and the other thing that you said that made sense is you need bigger parcels. You need lesser of them, but bigger parcels because the economics
You
of
need
scale.
both, you need both.
You need both.
But you need, if you're gonna do, take 30 acres and then put a higher density in those 30 acres and put everything over there and build like they do in Florida now. They put everybody in one little area, they put them in quarter-acre or eighth-acre lots and everything else. All the amenities are right there, there's public transportation that runs through the middle of it. You make it so that it's a.
We go up and
Mark,
not so much
We're not
out.
Florida. We
I'm
don't
just
have
saying,
those guys.
we
We're
need-
almost completely built out.
Well,
It is, right now, there's only small pieces.
well, 30 acres isn't that small.
Yes.
It's too big to require a minimum.
Judy, I have a question for you. Or
Whoever.
rather than focus on, my question is this, if the only segment of the market that Littleton tries to address is the smaller development, shall we say, single owner, small apartment condo, just that target, and it's not because I personally believe the rest of it isn't worth addressing or shouldn't be addressed, I'm asking the question, of the total issues in aging housing needs, the housing for the aging needed for the next, what was it, 20 years? What segment of Littleton's population will be served by, assuming it's built, will be served by such a particular kind of development? I'm not trying to purposely exclude anybody.
I understand.
I'm just asking of the total need, how much of this do we have here? And do we have the data for it? I mean,
People
we
really
may
want
not
to
know.
age in place if they can.
I'm sorry?
So, I said, people want to age in place in their home if they can.
Okay.
So there's one model of providing services that allow people to stay in their homes, and many people will do that until they die. There are people who, I cannot give you percentages because it varies it depends on the market and what the choices are in that market. There are people who won't stay in a larger home, either because they can't take care of it or they simply are tired of it.
Judy, I understand
Yeah.
that, I'm just talking about, I'm talking about a development which is targeted to those who can't afford or feel they can't afford or don't want to stay in their current home.
I can't answer that question. It
Okay,
would take a
well-
market study to do that.
Okay, so what's missing from this question, to address it, and now, I'm not asking anyone in this room to come up with a number that doesn't exist yet.
Sure.
We better find out what Littleton inventory of my demographic looks like. Because otherwise, this is an exercise in futility, wishful thinking.
Well, I hear you, and that may be the case. But I think it's a mistake to think that families in their 40s who have an aging parent don't also have a need. I think it's a mistake to think that the only need that gets addressed by a development in a senior residential development bylaw is for people who are seniors who are here now. What about the middle-aged families who have older parents who they're trying to figure out what to do for? Many times in assisted living developers will tell you this, that a sizable percentage of their referrals are actually coming from families in the community with an older parent who's off in East Oshkosh somewhere and they can't take care of them, and they're bringing them to be close by. That's also serving your Littleton residents.
So you're defining the market, you're defining the market in a certain way just now.
I think you have to.
Well, no, there's nothing have to in the question. If you decided to address a particular market need, you described a market need.
That's one.
And all I was asking, if we address that market and we want to define it your way, let's stop right there. And suppose this was, as it were, advertised and promoted to the segments
So
that were mentioned here.
what Michael's trying to say is, and maybe I'm reading into
Go
it.
ahead, Mark.
If we decided to do one thing, let's say we took this bylaw and we did one thing, we changed from allowing single-family housing to condominiums. So that you could have multiple units on 1 acre lots, so you could have smaller units that people could live in. How much of this segment would be satisfied in the people that are in town right now?
That takes
with
a
that
market
one little
study.
thing?
That takes a market study. That's just
10%
not
of the
in my scope.
18%.
It's definitely not in my scope.
50% of the
Cindy,
18%.
did you have a question?
I
knew you-
did. I just wanted to clarify, is this a senior housing bylaw or is it an affordable housing bylaw?
This one does not have an affordability component. There's another bylaw, the next one we're going to talk about,
Okay.
which is the
but-
affordable one.
Right, so this is geared specifically towards senior citizens?
But it would be, this bylaw would be subject to the inclusionary housing bylaw. The inclusionary housing bylaw would also would apply to any residential development, including most of these.
Okay,
But it's a separate bylaw.
okay. So I guess my concern is just thinking of municipal employees, the young professionals, who also want to afford to live in Littleton but really can't because of the current market.
That's why there's an inclusionary zoning piece that's
Okay.
separate from this. That's
Okay.
exactly why. That's also in your housing plan.
I'm gonna go over
Right.
to the
Yeah.
far left.
I just want to let you know that I'm one of them, I'm a newly widow who stepped down from a big house to a small house in Littleton,
Yeah.
and now I can't afford to stay in that small house.
It's common.
I hear you. So where do I go from here?
Well, that's part of the problem here, is
Yeah.
that you have a very limited product in this town. You have a lot of housing units, relatively speaking, but a limited product mix.
Yeah.
What this bylaw was trying to say was be open to a wider product mix. If you're trying to meet the needs of a lot of different kinds of people, your town is not homogeneous, I hate
Right.
to tell you, but I mean, you
Right.
do have people here with different needs.
Right.
But you only provide for a very limited product type. So, Mike, your question is a valid one, but it's a market study, and I can't do that. What we did to try to develop this bylaw was talk to the developers who built this product, who build senior housing, anywhere in the eastern market area, eastern Mass. Here, North Shore, South Shore, just where are they? And what are they seeing, and what are they looking for in order to go into a community and build something?
We have 3 affordables on Jeanette Way where I live,
Uh-huh,
and twice someone has passed, so they put it on the market, gone in one day.
yeah. Yeah, I don't think that is the problem. I don't think
Right.
meeting that need is a particular problem here.
Right.
But there's other needs, so.
Right.
Right, right.
Pam?
And that's what I wanted to address is, I think a lot of the people here in the room can really resonate and identify with the idea of downsizing and homeownership and what a lot of the discussion has been. But when I come at this from the other direction, I look at some of the surrounding communities and I say, why doesn't Littleton have assisted living? It's not that we don't have people who couldn't use it. It's not that we don't have people who aren't attracted to it or would like to have it, or as you were saying, Judy, have family members they'd like to bring to Littleton. These other communities, they have assisted livings that are full.
Yep.
Why do we not offer that piece?
Because you don't zone for it.
And obviously, those people are not here in this room saying, hey, I'd really like to have an assisted living place to live. But what I do hear is very clearly from people, they want to stay in this community. They don't want to give up their church, they don't want to give up their friends,
If they
they
can.
want to stay. And we don't have any provision for that at all.
Believe
So
me.
when we talk a lot about the homeownership piece, I don't think we should forget the other part of this, which is we're trying to open up the door for some other kinds of places for people to live.
Right.
Cindy, did you have your hand up?
Oh, sure, I did. I just wanted, it's actually going to elaborate on what Pamela just said. The majority of our housing stock right now is single-family units, according to the housing production plan. Less than, about 6% of it is
Some other unit.
duplexes or apartments or of that nature.
Yeah.
I think there's a real need, based on those numbers, for options for that type of housing, other than just the single-family units, and it's in the housing production plans. I
Right.
just think it's something we really need to consider.
And there's fear and anxiety about that, but That's often coupled with opportunity.
Right.
Judy, this plan that we tried at last May's meeting, it doesn't provide for assisted living.
Yes, it does. Yeah, assisted living residence, it's in here. Under uses, senior residential development may include the following uses.
And I think that's one of the things we didn't present very well at town meeting.
Oh, yeah.
There's independent living, there's continuing care, there's a whole host of product here that's not allowed in your current bylaw.
What's the minimum size of assisted living facility that you've seen?
60 to 70 units.
Yeah, maybe
With
that's,
memory care, it's about 90.
maybe that's a point that scares off people.
Sometimes, I've seen smaller ones in developments that are more like continuing care, where I might have some condominiums or townhouse units that are for seniors, and then I might have a small memory care facility associated with it, but when it's a freestanding assisted living development with memory care, 60 to 90 units is about what you see.
Yeah.
And there's a cost to operating those facilities. I mean, it is what it is, so.
But that's corporate, I think that's where it got lost. People kept thinking developer, corporate.
Well, but that's who builds assisted living.
Right, and they're
I mean,
gonna live, they're gonna own it. It's not private ownership, and that's probably where the difference came in.
Yeah.
So Mark, I'm in agreement that we should be able to have an assisted living.
I agree too, I'm not opposed to that, all I'm trying to say is there's two different kinds of things. There's independent ownership, which is changing the bylaw to have small, single-family condos and apartments that we don't offer right now. There's that. So
Well,
people-
this does that.
Right, and also, we have to make sure people understand that the assisted living, the memory care living, and those things, a corporation comes in and builds a facility. It's more of a facility. That's why the apartment thing shouldn't scare people, because that's a facility. It's not an apartment complex, it's a facility. You go in, you have your own place. As you need more care, you want more amenities, those things will be available. Like Bestway, and the best one around us is Deaconess. That's what Deaconess does. They build facilities that take you from moving out of your house at 70 to maybe needing a meal once in a while so you can have food brought in or whatever, or if you go to a restaurant slash
This
cafeteria.
does that too.
It does do it, but the scare that everyone had was that we're building apartment
Are
complexes.
you sure of that?
And that's all they heard, and that's all they thought about. So that's why we have to put their mind at ease that these are not apartment complexes, these are facilities.
Well, what did you guys think? Do you think that that's what
I
got
can
scared
speak,
by
actually, I
everybody?
was gonna speak directly to that. Like, I really sympathize with you not making that vote, but I think the concern that I had, and a lot of the people that I was talking to was, and you even said it earlier tonight, like, once you issue one special permit to one person, like, what's to say the next person who comes along doesn't get the same consideration? And like, it didn't feel like there was enough coverage to keep people from bypassing the zoning laws and building very dense, like, complexes that were essentially open to anybody.
But no, see, that's
Like,
where you missed it.
well,
See,
but
that's-
but
that's
there
what
was
you-
no expectation on my part, and I read through the bylaw
Yeah.
before the town meeting, that there was any coverage for us as regular citizens, like, that wasn't sitting on the planning board or the zoning board to, like, protect us from, as you say, like, giant corporate monoliths coming in.
But that's what I'm trying to say, that's what the difference was. There's single-family ownership, and then there's a corporation comes in and builds a facility for the different levels of care. It's not an apartment complex. You can't just walk in and want to rent it at 45 or 50 years old. You have to, have criteria to get in there.
No,
But
you're doing it
but
again.
the way
Mark.
the
You're doing
bylaw
it
was
again.
written, I don't think that
You're doing it again.
distinction was made.
Listen to what he says.
I heard what he said, and he thinks you can put, it's a way to put apartment complexes here. These are not apartment complexes. These are
That's what he was
facilities.
afraid of. He read the
I know.
bylaw and saw nothing that was gonna protect the average citizen from these things happening. It was laid on the planning board to have the decision of who gets in
That's
and who
exactly
doesn't.
No, it's not,
That's what he read, that's what he was saying
it's in
to
the
you.
intensity of use, what is allowed, what isn't
That's what
allowed.
we have to do a better job of
Explaining to people.
This is-
explaining, and
It's
if
in
That's
there.
all. I'm not saying he's,
I know, and that was his fear at town meeting, I get that. But the intent was to have different levels of service.
But the intent is different from the actual implementation of it, as 10 years from now, when none of you are on the planning board, and I don't know who's on the planning board, like, some Yahoo comes in and puts 400 units, like, 3 doors down from my house.
No, it isn't.
But
He-
but again, like,
read it.
That might be how you read it, but that's not how the bylaw is read. He has to have a reason to put 400 units in, and it's not just to sell it to people who want to live in an apartment. You can't just do that. He's not a 35-year-old guy gonna, a family going in there.
then I think it does need to be better written and more airtight for.
It's written
us.
what's allowed and what's not allowed. That's not allowed. It's allowed as a
Well,
facility.
sir, to your point, I mean, I think that is one of the decisions that we need direction about, is do you want to require as a town a deeded age restriction or not? We had a reason for not recommending that. It's your bylaw, and I just want direction. So the conversation you're having here is not uncommon at all. If it's any consolation to you, and I almost hate to even tell the story, but I will. I live in a town that was probably the first or second in Massachusetts to adopt what's called planned development zoning. And we have 9 developments in my town that were built under this PD bylaw. So they're townhouses, they're condominiums, and the rest of the town is single-family homes. There are basically no children in those developments, and most of them are 30 years old or more. So they've endured through market change, and they still tend to attract the same households. It's people downsizing, it's people moving to my town whose grandchildren are living there. It's becoming increasingly non-custodial parents wanting to stay in the community. But they're not kid generators, and the reason is that there's plenty of option in the rest of the market in that town for a family with children to have choice. So I think the markets are all very different with this, and I'm not going to tell you that you're never going to have anybody who's under 55 living in one of these developments. I'm not going to do that. But I will say that most people choose a place to live that responds to what they need at a given point in time. And when I had 9 children, I was not going to live in a townhouse of 2-bedroom units. I lived in a single-family home, and I needed one that was 3 times the size as it was. But I mean, that's my choice. That was my choice at that time.
But I don't think I was even concerned about the demographics as much as you pointed out earlier, like some developer coming in and taking advantage.
But don't forget that a special permit is not a by right thing. Special permit has to take a majority vote of this board, and it's based on conditions that are unique to each site. And just because you grant one special permit to this guy on this part of the town, that doesn't set a precedent that the guy on the other side of town is going to get the same treatment.
But again,
Everything is unique to each site. Each special permit
His
stands by
wording
itself.
is when we sit here and say, no, yes, somebody else might turn around and say, yes, yes.
Well, I would point
That's
out
his
that
word.
even if another board wants to say yes to something, the development still has to meet the design standards in the bylaw.
Right, and which were, when I read them, like, that it allowed a pretty intense density in many cases.
Well, but it also
Well-
requires an architectural style and a layout.
Okay, fair
That
enough.
is a
Like,
little different from what a family typically
so
would want.
maybe this is, we don't have to worry, we don't have to like debate this specific bylaw anymore. But I think my point is,
Sure.
like, I think you understand exactly where I was coming from and a lot of the people that were sitting with me. And I think a lot of the people that voted against this bylaw had these exact concerns.
Okay, that's very helpful to know.
All right, but one of the things that we got going here is how many people are, over 60 years old, and you put your hands up, please. How many of you own your own home? How many of you have watched your taxes almost triple in the last 15 years? Oh, no, that's because you haven't been here for 15
Yeah.
years. Okay?
Like you don't count.
So, here's our, as far as I'm concerned, here's our sword. Is that as you all get older, no one's having any more children, you're living in your own home. I want you to stay in your home. I don't want you to sell, I don't want you to move away. And the reason being is because when you move out of your 3- and 4-bedroom house, who's going in? And I love kids. I don't love my brothers and sisters at home, but I'm one of 8, you know?
I beat you.
Yes.
But how do you
My
believe
mother
in a
had 7
special
miscarriages,
permit?
though.
How
So,
do you
hey,
believe in a special permit when one member of the board says, well, if we give it to one, we
Did
have
you,
to give it
did you
to
hear,
everyone?
did
No, you
did the middle of my sentence get in the way of the beginning of yours?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, what I want is, I want the elderly to stay in their homes, because I don't want you to sell to people with 4 and 5 and 6 kids, or 9 or 8. I want to find a way that we could, even if before this all comes, that maybe we can reduce the taxes on the elderly, so that theirs doesn't keep going up. And then when you move on, maybe there's a kitty that the town then gets at the end. You know what I mean? Your house sells, you own your house, most of you must own them outright. And when you, if you don't have to keep coming up with $10,000 a year for taxes, and maybe you come up with 5,000. And then in 15 years you pass away, there's 15 times 5, that's $75,000 the town gets out of your estate.
My
I don't
neighbor,
know
my
if that
neighbor
would
is
work.
doing that.
A deferred tax. Well,
It's
you can
called
do
a
that.
deferred
Yeah,
tax
you can
plan,
do-
and it
you
is
can do that
available
now.
through the Office of the Assessors, and it has nothing to do with this
Right.
zoning.
But, once again,
You
you
just
know,
go upstairs and talk to the assessors if you're interested in that.
and how much will they take off your bill?
You have to
As
pay
much as
more.
you want. You can
Yeah.
take 100%, you can take $100 off.
Really?
There's a lot of estate issues with it.
Yeah. I don't want to
It
do
gets-
that,
It
though.
gets paid back when you, when the
Property
property
sold
changes,
or-
I'm on the Board of Assessors, property changes
Yeah.
hands, gets paid back at that point, it's like a
Right.
loan, 1% interest. Anyone who's interested
Comes
can
out
go
of
upstairs
proceeds
and
of
talk to
sale.
the assessors.
Okay, well, there's, I
might
didn't know
do
that.
that.
Huh?
I might do that.
So,
Me too.
so the
By
gentleman.
the time you die, we'll have nothing left for our kids.
But that's far afield from what we're talking
Through the,
about here.
through the
Okay,
chair,
Sarah.
I have a question. Is that okay? The gentleman that was concerned about, or helped us understand some of the decision-making thoughts that were taking place at the meeting, were you worried that apartments could be built out of this? Because apartments can be built through
Oh,
this.
yes, I looked at that, and the density was, as I recall, like pretty substantial.
Yeah, it is in order to encourage the rental development. It
It
is.
was, there was like, I think there was a, no more than 30 feet high, or there was like a pretty impressive height maximum, minimum. So,
The, and Judy, is there a way of, what would be the way that we would be able to ensure that we only get singles and seniors and
You
maybe the the grandmother that's coming to town to stay near her
You
grandchildren?
can impose an age restriction. I can change this to an age-restricted bylaw.
But then you're limiting this whole project to a certain demographic in a certain time
That's why I
frame.
didn't write it that way.
And tomorrow is gonna be completely different, it's gonna put it out
That's
of the
why I didn't
market.
do it.
Yeah, that's what we face
But-
with this, that's the
Okay.
conversation,
But you see,
so-
if we can limit this to like 2-bedroom units, and that alone will, help ensure that you're not getting families out of this.
I don't agree with that.
No, I don't either.
Two
You
bedrooms.
you reduce the incidence of
Family,
families,
two
but to say you won't get any, I don't want to mislead anybody in this room. I mean, I can't predict who's going to buy one of these developments.
You know,
I can certainly tell you that in assisted living and independent living, you are not going to get young people unless they have a severe disability.
but I know if we had some, like an apartment complex that's, 2 stories in height, that's it's built for 2 bedrooms, with,
They don't build 2-story apartment developments. They don't build that.
Those are townhouses.
well, then
It doesn't work. The model doesn't work.
we got townhouses.
So
Well,
we take-
townhouse, but sure, 2 stories, but rental
Yeah.
doesn't work.
What
So
about
you take-
independent living units?
Independent living is actually the one that tends to be the densest.
And that's what you restrict to
And the reason
apartment.
for that is that someone choosing to live in, just so you know what the rationale is, someone choosing an independent living development is going to pay a rent that's higher than they would rent if they just went to an apartment development, regular old apartment development, because they're paying an increment for services. So if you're the developer trying to get a market, gets people moving to your independent living development, you really have to offer something that creates a competitive edge for the people who can make that choice. Am I going to go and rent an apartment in Acton, that's no way age restricted or whatever, or am I going to pay the extra increment and live in an independent living development in Littleton?
But what's the difference between independent living and an apartment complex?
It's, there's some services in independent living, the units are small, they're very small. Independent living is not 2-bedroom units, it's just not.
No, and it also has, it goes from being independent to semi-dependent to food services and everything else. It's not a straight apartment complex, at least it wasn't
No, but
designed to be
they
a
aren't.
straight.
But they are
apartment
rental,
complex.
it is
It is a
usually
rental
rental.
component, but
Yeah.
it's not a normal rental, like you said, not a normal two-bedroom apartment. It's designed specifically for an older client.
So the rent per square foot is higher than it is if I just go to a
But I could
regular old apartment.
see where you'd be
So-
concerned that it could go anywhere. I do get that. I do understand it, but our thought was by putting in what you had to do inside of it would restrict where it would actually have to go. It'd have to be a good-sized project, and it would have to have different levels of it. Like, I don't know if you know Deaconess and Concord. It's an apartment complex, it's a high-rise, it has elevators, it has everything else. You could start, go into Deaconess and have your own unit where you can come and go, you have a car there and
Yeah,
everything.
I'm familiar with that sort of
As you
model
get,
of,
but
yeah.
that's what we were talking about for an apartment complex. As you got older, you went into a different unit. As if you had early stages of dementia or something like that, you went into the memory part of it. That's kind of what we thought about the apartment complex idea, not an open
I
compartment.
think we've already gone over that of the transition and kind of having everything in there. I'd like to move on to the affordable piece
Sure.
of this, if we can.
Okay, let's skip to inclusionary zoning. Just go over the next slide and we'll jump into this, because we'll be back. This is
Right,
the only
this is-
discussion that's gonna happen about this, guys. So, inclusionary zoning, right now, your zoning bylaw requires affordability in only one type of development, and that is the over 55 bylaw. So, what he suggested was liberate it from that restriction, because you have other housing needs in the community, as you pointed out. You've got town employees who can't live here and so forth. And just say, if you're building a housing development that's over a certain number of units, the thresholds vary from town to town, then you have to provide an affordable housing benefit. And that can range from, you have to actually create units in your development, which you would certainly want to do for a larger development, to if it's a really small one, maybe you want to let the developer pay a fee in lieu of creating the affordable units. And now you have the ability to start to create a bank locally, that a housing trust, which is the third piece of this, can administer to support affordability in some other development, or some other, whether it's buying down existing homes or investing in some assisted living or independent living development in order to get affordability. But the concept is that inclusionary zoning either encourages or requires affordable housing in a development. And so this proposal, and we haven't had a chance to discuss this at all, but the one that's in front of you says, okay, if you have a bylaw like this, then any residential development that requires a special permit from the planning board would be subject to this bylaw. That means that if you're building a certain type of housing, or you require a special permit, you're into inclusionary zoning requirements. And then, or if you're doing a subdivision plan of, I think it was 6 or more units, I forget, I think it was 6 or more units. So you're saying if you're doing a development over a certain size, you're going to provide affordability. Now, as to how you do that, there's a couple of different rules. I'm glad I brought food, Peter.
That's the only reason he's still here.
Yeah. So this says if you're subject to this bylaw, then at least 10% of the units in your development have to be affordable. And you can do that in a couple of different ways. There's this concept called the on-site unit, which is in your development, you're going to provide affordability. And that's probably the best way to make it happen, because the developers know how to build housing and towns don't. And so get the developers to build the housing for you, because you need it. So, that would be kind of one way to do it. But if you were doing a development that was larger, when you get up to something like 20 units or more, then they have to do the on-site units. Because at that level of development, you're usually dealing with developers who kind of are comfortable with the bureaucracy of affordable housing. They're used to dealing with this paperwork. Often the very small developers, the guys who do 6, 8 units, they're just not. And it's very difficult for them to deal with it. So those are the people you say, okay, you can provide a fee in lieu of units. So for each affordable unit you had to give us, instead of building one, you can give us money. And that money goes into a housing trust, which is the third piece, as I said, of this package. So it provides for a fee in lieu or building the units in the development. The units would have to be eligible for the town's subsidized housing inventory, so that, part of why communities adopt this is that you're at 10% now, but you may not be in the future. So if you're creating affordability in your ongoing market development, then you have a way to sort of stay pace of the 10%.
protect ourselves against 40Bs.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Now, I want to just point out, however, that the way this is drafted right now, we have not discussed this, so the board may not like this at all. I have said a couple of types of housing are exempt. And one is independent or assisted living residences. And there's a reason for that. It is very, very difficult under the state's program to create units that are financially feasible to build and operate in assisted living that also qualify for the subsidized housing inventory. This has been a problem all over the place. So I'm just saying, head this off at the pass and say, if you're in this type of development, you don't have to comply with the inclusionary housing piece. The other type of housing that would be exempt is if a multi-unit building was destroyed by fire or something, and someone's just rebuilding what was already there. Naturally, you wouldn't, make them subject to this because they're just replacing what they had. So the rest of the bylaw is just about kind of the procedures. I mean, what does it mean to be a qualified purchaser? It's the same thing that you would be if you were trying to buy a Chapter 40B unit or rent one. A lot of this is kind of left to the planning board needs to adopt rules and regulations because you don't want to clutter your zoning bylaw with a lot of stuff like how many copies of the application to give us and so forth. But essentially what it does is it says once you're into this, you're either building units or you're paying a fee. And we're going to make sure that we actually get the units because you're not going to be able to get too far with your project until we start to see an affordable housing benefit as well. So if someone can't build out all the market rate units and then come to the planning board at the end and say, I can't make this work. So that is here, and that is kind of another piece of this, as I said, package, that you are allowing for this kind of high density, but you may also get units that are of a sufficient scale that you actually get either some affordability or you get some money that you begin to generate into this trust fund, which gets to the heart of the matter about how do you create a unit that's really affordable to somebody who can't afford an affordable unit when it's priced for the Boston metro area. You need a bank. You need a local bank, and that's what a trust is. So that's what the inclusionary zoning piece is. It is not limited to senior housing, which is right now what you do. And then the third piece of this package is establishing a housing trust that would actually administer this money if you were to put the whole package together. And that is kind of the way communities are doing it now. You have a body called a housing trust. They can administer fees in lieu, they can administer CPA funds for housing, and they really are the scouts for opportunity in the community to create affordability, either by preserving existing units or buying new ones. Somebody mentioned Stowe earlier, and Stowe had a very interesting experience years ago. They had a nonprofit formed to oversee a senior housing development, rental development, that was actually built by an organization called the Community Builders, which is a national, very well prominent developer. And part of what they did with Stowe was to say, we'll help you set up a nonprofit to run this development. Well, the development was built under a program that didn't work. And it took about 18 years for people to realize this program doesn't work. So that project was on the verge of going bankrupt. And Stowe had established the Community Preservation Act, and they put money out of their CPA funds to basically preserve the affordability of that development by investing in it. They hold a mortgage. They have a mortgage on it, and they put money into it, and that's part of how that senior center was built. So, you can do really good things for your community if you have these tools. And this is all in your housing plan. It's talking about the trust, talking about inclusionary zoning. What we're trying to do here is say, you got a plan. If you don't want it to sit on a shelf, you got to implement it. And so here's one way we came up with to do it. We need direction about whether that makes sense too.
But the tool is money.
Tool is money, absolutely.
That's the tool.
That's the tool.
Cindy?
Sure. Is there a formula to determine the fee?
I kept a really simple formula in here. This is one of the big controversies in inclusionary zoning is how do you set the fee? This is a small town, and I wasn't going to set you up to try to compute some complicated fee. So right now, the way this is drafted, it's, where did I put it? Yeah. Whatever the HUD income limit is for a particular household type, housing type, which is really the number of bedrooms in it, your fee in lieu would be 2 times the the income limit for a household of 4. So if the household of 4 income limit is 65,000, then the payment in lieu is twice that. It's a very easy way to approach this formula. There are much more complicated ways to do it.
Okay.
I just don't like to go into a small town like this and say, you're gonna do a, residual land value analysis, and, I mean, it just gets really complicated. So I just suggested a simple way. There are many other ways to do it, but that's what it is. It's 2 times the household of 4.
And we get those numbers every year?
Yeah, those you get, they're handed to you. So you always know what those numbers are. You don't have to go research them. They just get handed to you. The Housing Authority has them, DHCD has them.
They
and you just-
automatically escalate.
They automatically do. They change every year. They're updated according to what's happening with the market. So it's an easy way for the town to administer the bylaw. You just say, well, what's the income limit for a household of 4? For moderate income, multiply it by 2. That's the developer's fee.
So inclusionary housing,
Yeah.
this bylaw could apply to anything that's built in the town, right?
Anything with 6 or more units.
Okay.
But I want to just underscore that a development with fewer than 20, but more than 6, would have the option, if the board chose to give it to them, to pay a fee instead of building a unit. Anything over 20 units has to build the units.
Okay.
That's the way this is drafted right now. I'm sorry, Peter.
That's okay. 6 units pays a fee, 120,000. 12, 240, or 12, 120?
It's 10%, so once you go over 10, then you're up to the next whole number.
I knew that.
I thought you probably did, but that's fine.
Any other comments from the crowd?
I know this is new to everybody here, so it was the first chance we had to talk about this, but
I think the inclusionary bylaw, inclusionary housing bylaw is great. Just have to take a look at it and see if there's something you want to adjust, but this looks good.
Yeah.
Our original bylaw that the biggest problem on this one was the ability to build apartments that would and could have people under 50.
5.
Under 55.
Yeah.
That was a problem with this. Seems like it was a problem. And I guess the only solution is that if we want flexibility, we got to deal with that at the planning board level. And our tools are that the decision through a special permit. This board can mitigate the project's impact on the surrounding area, ensure compliance with this article. When you look at that the development meets the purposes, requirements, and development standards of the article. So we could actually, if somebody wanted to build an apartment building behind someone's house, we could actually say no.
this is strictly about the inclusion of affordable units. This is not about the type of housing. This is strictly about requiring affordability in any residential development over a certain size.
I'm back to
Which is back to the original.
the
Oh,
original.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
you mean the senior housing
Yeah,
bylaw,
senior
I'm sorry.
housing, yeah. 'Cause this looks good, the inclusionary housing looks good, but
Affordable housing?
the biggest problem I think we have, and it turns out must have been at the town meeting, was this ability to build an apartment house behind someone's house. And I think that the planning board has tools to this decision paragraph that could prevent that from happening.
I mean, there's lots of things that could be added to the senior residential development bylaw that aren't there now. I start with something that I really think is gonna work, and then I work back from there. And I don't mean that in a negative way, I just mean, we spend so much time talking to people in this industry that I think we had a pretty good sense of what is the industry looking for. That doesn't mean that you have to give everything the industry is looking for. I'm just saying that if you're asking me to give you a bylaw that I know is going to produce something, that's what I tried to do. But you could have more specific special permit criteria. There's a lot of things that could be done to, I think, protect someone from that feeling that a big apartment development's gonna end up in my backyard. There's a lot we can talk about.
So we could do that.
And actually, we have some more meetings coming up where we can work on the details with Judy.
Yeah.
Just hoping to get information
Yeah.
today.
Are we gonna schedule this for next month?
Actually, we need to have a scheduling discussion. And then I'll.
Oh, yeah.
If we look at the decision, the decision criteria that this board has.
For which?
I'm talking about the zoning amendment for senior residential development.
Yeah, yeah.
So if we look at the decision criteria that the board has, we want to have enough tools in there so that we could say no to a development that's behind somebody's house.
And I think those are all the fine details that we need to have a conversation about after this. I think we've had the opportunity to kind of noodle on.
So that way, we can alleviate the concern that this gentleman has, and allow the apartments to be, you know, complexes with apartments or senior residential housing to go in.
Totally up to you guys, just
Yeah.
looking for direction.
What's so we're looking at meetings in,
Let's see, Ed was not available next, on August 3rd when we had a meeting scheduled, but he is available the following Monday or Tuesday, which is the, what? The
7th or the 8th?
Are we changing the whole planning board meeting to that?
That's up to you.
Yeah, I don't think.
7th or 8th work for,
I can tell you in a minute.
Would you prefer Monday or Tuesday?
I haven't missed a meeting in a long time. Whatever you put up, I'm gonna try and miss.
But Peter, you're so valuable.
So we'll work that out later, right?
we can
Nothing
always work
settled
on
now?
scheduling, and then I'll make sure that I share that information as widely as I can.
So do you want me to hold those 2 nights so you can sort this out? I can hold them for a little bit.
Yes, would you please?
Yes, sir.
So you'll send an email around and we'll all respond back to, including Ed, so it's
Yeah.
not speaking. Okay.
Yep.
So I'd like to say this is informative and progressive.
Yeah.
Make a motion
Open
to,
up the 8th, too.
We appreciate all of you coming and sharing your thoughts.
any other thoughts?
It's time to
None
go.
happened.
Go Tigers!
Was that a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'd second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting of this evening. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody from the audience want to have any final comment?
We did?
Oh, I already asked them that. Weren't you paying attention?
All right, meeting adjourned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You good with that?